All right, let's take you back to South Texas now, where that SpaceX flight is not going on track. I want to bring in CBS News reporter Jason Allen. Jason, we're hearing that they have lost radio contact. What's the very latest?
Yeah, that happened just a few minutes ago, Liz. SpaceX confirming that they have lost contact with the ship, and this was as it was making its approach to come down in the Indian Ocean. You know, when I joined you just an hour ago, everything looked fantastic, didn't it? They got that launch off after a couple of pauses at 40 seconds in the countdown. The Super Heavy booster took off. We saw it get it up into that suborbital space, and the booster separated. The problems kind of started a few minutes after that, where the booster did not come down all the way to the ocean like they expected it to. And then about 30 minutes or so into the flight, they weren't able to open the payload doors on the ship, so they weren't able to deploy those dummy satellites. Then they had some propellant leaks, and they lost the ability to kind of control the direction of that ship as it goes from side to side. And so when that happened, as the ship's starting to make the re-entry, they can't control it so that the heat shields are in the right place. So the ship just started to spin out of control. It's still coming down. We saw SpaceX really take some control measures in that, right? They got rid of all of the fuel that was left, all the propellant that was left. All that area in the Indian Ocean had already been cleared away. They planned for this, and the ship was still coming down in the same area where they expected it to. So there wasn't anybody in the danger zone. But unfortunately, they weren't able to complete a lot of those experiments that they had planned, but that's why they call this a test flight, and they'll go back now and try to figure out where things went wrong and improve it for the next one.
Yeah, there's been many more tests before this one, Jason, where they've tried to work out the kinks. And the biggest concern the last test was that the debris really caused issues with other air traffic. Is there any concern as this ship comes closer to Earth that debris is going to impact, flights coming in and out like it did before?
Great question. And before, where this came down was in that more heavily traveled area along the Caribbean, and it was above some of those island nations with Bahamas and Turks and Caicos, and even some of the major airports in Florida. This time the ship got well past that, getting across Africa, the other side of the world, into the Indian Ocean, north of Australia, and this was an area where they had cleared out all ship traffic. So we'll be watching to see if perhaps we get some video of the ship coming apart, because that is something they expected to happen. It would not have been oriented the right way. They did fully expect it to break up, and even right before they lost contact and camera view of the ship while it was still in the air, you could start to see some of the pieces that were peeling away as they feel the heat. So it's hopeful that because they already had that area figured out and they had moved traffic away from it, they've moved ships away from it, that there shouldn't be anybody in danger. But that'll be something we'll be watching for reports of here over the next few minutes.
I know you will be watching, especially Jason Allen, live for us in Houston, where that rocket launched just about, as he said, over about an hour ago or so. Jason, thanks so much for that insight. I want to bring in now CBS News space consultant Bill Harwood. Bill, I just want to get your reaction to what we've just witnessed here with this the spaceship not quite working the way they wanted it to.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's sort of a good news, bad news thing. That upper stage. This time around, the Starship got into space as they had hoped. The engines appeared to work normally, but as Jason was pointing out, they had a propellant leak that put the craft in a slow spin. Flight controllers could not control it. That ruled out a controlled descent to splashdown, which means it inevitably was going to break up in the atmosphere and not make it down intact. Now, the Super Heavy first stage, as we've discussed, it was put through a deliberately more stressful reentry trajectory than previously. They were deliberately trying to stress some of the areas on this rocket to see how they stand up to a more severe environment, which would let them save a little propellant, which could go to payloads launching in the future. So the failure of that stage was not an out-of-the-blue surprise. Maybe it's to be expected when you put something to that kind of a test, but still, they didn't get either stage back to intact landings, and that's definitely going to be a disappointment.
How is this going to impact Elon Musk's plan in terms of a timeline for getting these rockets into space with people on board?
Well, the way SpaceX operates, they tend to do their testing in flights, and not in computer simulations, which is kind of the industry standard. I have no doubt they'll be back to flying soon. They'll have lots of telemetry from this flight. They'll figure out what went wrong. They'll implement fixes to make sure it doesn't happen again, and then they'll try again. I mean, that's the way they test. So we'll just have to see how long that takes in terms of when will they be able to put people on board. That's anybody's guess. You know, NASA's hoping they can do it in the next couple of years to put astronauts on the surface of the moon using a Starship variant as their lunar lander in the Artemis program. But we have no idea if they're going to be able to stick to that schedule or not. They're going to have a lot of successful test flights before you put anybody on board.
And we know right now the ship is over the Indian Ocean. That's what we're hearing, Bill. I'm curious how you think that how things went today compared to other tests. Was it better, worse? Feels like there were a lot of issues with this one.
There were. You know, in terms of the first stage, like I said, they were deliberately making this a more difficult reentry, and the fact that they didn't get it down intact into the ocean, you know, that's not to be unexpected. In fact, they were deliberately sending it to an ocean landing instead of back to the launch pad, just in case a mishap like this happened where it could damage, you know, launch infrastructure back at the base. So, you know, that one you kind of got to chalk that up to the nature of the test. The Starship performance, that was disappointing. They've had flights that were much more successful than this in the past. But again, they did put in some tests on this flight that were a little bit unusual, a little bit more stressful for reentry. But propellant leaks that they mentioned is causing this spin, which helped them lose control. That's not expected. So clearly they've got more work to do to figure out how to structurally beef this thing up so it can withstand the rigors of spaceflight.
As Jason Allen said earlier, that's why they call it a test. Bill Harwood, thank you so much for joining us.
That's right.